Welcome to Rallying the Forge. I'm not your host Solimer, but he left the door open, so you're stuck with me now. Hi! My name is Traveler. I play card games. But what I enjoy even more than playing card games is yapping about them. So here we are with another discussion of the meta. I think we were overdue for this. We haven't had one of those talks since, well, the launch of Set 3. But ever since then, a lot of things happened. We've gotten Set 4, a couple of legendary drops, but most importantly, we played more tournaments and found out new things. In order to understand this tier list, you need to see that I am sorting deck archetypes into tiers of power. Not specific fuses, just deck archetypes. That means you may very well have a deck that stems from an archetype I sort into B tier that is so focused that it can definitely win games against a deck that stems from an S tier archetype. That's within the realm of possibility. It happens all the time, in fact. Also, what do I mean by these tiers? I think S, A, and B are major archetypes that you want to bring in high stakes competitive tournaments. These decks are capable of winning those tournaments. C and D, in my opinion, are not capable. Does that mean they are just bad and you shouldn't play them? No, obviously not. It just means that they are better off used as support strategies for major archetypes, if that makes sense for you. We'll probably get into combining different archetypes into a fuse later on, but I think I've gotten the point across. Also, everything I'm about to say is just my personal opinion, it's my own perceptions. You may very well disagree, in fact I encourage you to, and let's have a discussion. That's really all this is about having a nice discussion and perhaps learning something along the way. Good. Now let's get into this. Let's not waste any more time, because I think this is going to take a while. Right. DFD. This deck aims to play a lot of spells or upgrade them, just get them into the banish pile by any means, and then use Mantis+Forge Seal to get multiple uses out of RoS's ability Darkforge Drain. The best scenario is when you boost a breakthrough creature while you're off Forge and the creature is attacking, because then your opponent doesn't have a window to interact. Now, I think this archetype has fallen out of favor. Just a bit. It used to be one of the strongest in the meta, but I don't think that's the case anymore. It's not like cards have been printed that invalidate this strategy. In fact, the exact opposite is true. Every new set we get less removal. However, people started playing differently. People were aware of what is coming and people start prioritizing removal. I think something in the mindset has shifted over the past couple of years. Now, this deck is still capable of winning, mostly because it's very flexible in its individual fuses. Because at the end of the day, you just need a set 1 Utera list. You can fuse this with anything as long as it has some spells and acceleration for them. So the possibilities really are endless. However, its potential is not endless. At the end of the day, you're always going to swing in with a big creature and hope it connects. I'm going to put this into the B tier because I think the strategy is capable of winning big tournaments. It's just that other decks can do so more consistently. Despite the fact that this archetype is, in my opinion, very consistent. You already gain advantage by just playing spells, any spells. So that makes the archetype in of itself very consistent. It's just the downside is a lot of how well the strategy works depends on your opponents, depends on what they are running. And there are going to be quite a few archetypes also in the upper tiers that really prioritize removal. That's why I can only put this into the B tier. Let's talk about a similar deck. Darkflame Sunder. Well, it's not entirely similar, but the approach is kind of the same. You want to either play or upgrade a lot of spells and then get multiple uses of Darkflame. Darkflame is an ability that deals 5 damage to you and twice as much damage as you have spells in your banish pile to something, preferably your opponent. Now, an advantage of a Darkforge Drain is that your opponent cannot directly interact with this. They cannot remove a big creature and then just not get hit. There's no window of interaction. However, there are some downsides attached to this. First of all, you have to hit yourself for a substantial amount. Hitting yourself for 3 times potentially, is significant, especially considering that strategies that aim to manipulate either your or your opponent's life total are very dominant. So the amount of damage you deal to yourself mounts up when combined with the damage a Shambler might deal to you. All in all, I think this archetype is a bit underexplored. I think we could try it out more, but I don't see it being better than DFD overall. I don't think this archetype has ever put in any results, not to my knowledge, so I will put this into the C tier for now. Whether it's going to be high or low C tier, we will see that in the end when I sort some other decks into the list. Let's continue with another Darkforge archetype. Blightmane Dragon combo. Blightmane Dragon combo is a deck that aims to get multiple uses out of Blightmane Dragon's deploy ability. So you can potentially burst your opponent for 50 damage in a turn. You do this by using Cercee's, what's it called? Darkforge Reanimation, something like that. Essentially, Blighted Cercee destroys one of your creatures and one of your opponent's creatures, and then you reanimate a blighted creature. And that way you basically get 2 deploys of Blightmane Dragon and burst your opponent for an ungodly amount. So while this win condition is pretty strong, I would compare it to Krogius, because it's basically the same amount of damage, except for he doesn't have to swing in. It's much more difficult to get there, because you have to see a specific card every cycle, and you lose tempo by playing Blightmane Dragon level 1. There are ways to play this deck without the Cercee Forgeborn, though I wouldn't recommend it. For example, I can imagine somebody combining this with Darkforge Sunder with Darkflame. But then you have 2 problems. First of all, how are you going to reanimate the dragon? Yeah, well, maybe you reanimate it with set 4 Necrium, right? Right of the Fallen. There are options. And then you still have to find a way to trigger the Blightmane Dragon, because it only uses its deploy ability when somebody has lost life this turn. That could be the Darkflame of the Sunder, but then the timing of your Darkflame is dependent on when you draw something. You don't really want that. It's just easier if you use the Cercee, because then you have one play for getting the dragon online and another that is the dragon, and then you can activate the ability and get 2 triggers, and that usually is enough to win the game. But you have to find your combo pieces in time, in the right cycle when your ability is live. So it's a really high rolly deck. So I think its win con is as potent as top tier decks, but getting there is just so much harder. When you are, however, playing a blighted deck for whatever reason, you can always look out for this combo, and it will definitely improve your list. I'll also put this into the C tier, and I'm going to put it above the Sunder, that's for sure. Yeah, let's talk about something a bit more competitive, shall we? Army Commander 4 Grapple. I've already talked about Krogius, let's talk about Krogius some more. This deck aims to play a Mantis and a Forge Seal on curve to get to Army Commander 4 as quickly as possible to then summon Krogius. Now this sounds like a lot of work, but it really isn't, because what we are playing as a Forgebone is a so-called perfect Cercee. It has the abilities Life Drain, Death Touch, the order doesn't really matter, and then Army Commander as its fourth ability. So what these abilities do is they slow down the game tremendously if you use them over and over, and they kind of make sure that you get to cycle 3, and then it's fairly easy to get Krogius out. You just have to find him, put him into the discard pile somehow, activate one of your abilities, and get a Krogius without ever having played him before. It's a powerful win con, and it's a hard win con because Krogius is difficult to interact with. So this deck is basically the original competitive SolForge deck. It still puts in results, not only because of Krogius, because you can definitely use other targets for Army Commander 4 as well. Krogius is just the most potent one. But there's nothing wrong with playing towards a Taliesin, a Necromancer, a Shambling Shambler. There are options. And something that also keeps this archetype afloat is the insanely high card quality set 1 Necreum has. I'm going to put this into the A tier. And I can already give away so much, it's probably the high A tier. Right. While we are at it, let's talk about another grapple deck. Life Gain Synergies Grapple. So, why would you ever play a grapple deck without a perfect Cercee and Mantis and the Forge Seal? If I'm perfectly honest, there is no reason to do that, ever. But people do it regardless because they simply do not have these Mantis, Forge Seal, Krogius decks and Cercees and stuff. They just have decks that have a bunch of life gain and synergies for them. Mainly Swamp Moss Lurker, Zero's Will, and Primal Surge. Those are your free cards that are basically cheating because you need to do something unfair to win games. And those decks are still, despite kind of incomplete, they are still potent enough to get results. You don't even have to run Cercee. You can just run Oros. He also has an ability that gains you some life. This still works. The problem of these decks is they lack a hard win con. They can get towards the late game because they can develop boards very quickly and they can stay alive against burn decks. But then they lack a hard win con. They don't have this Krogius, this Army Commander stuff. They just keep playing fairly. And that's why they basically always lose to the same deck that happens to run Army Commander 4 and Krogius. Yet, outside of that specific matchup, these decks get results. And Life Gain Grapple I would put into B tier and above Darkforge Drain. Darkforge Drain is probably more win-con focused, and Life Gain Grapple is more card quality focused, if that makes sense. And sometimes just having better cards in your opponent is a win-con. It's just not a hard win-con like a button that you can press and now the game is over. Okay, good. Yeah, let's talk about this Mantis here. Speaking of hard win cons. I decided to not include a lot of combo decks on this tier list. The reason for that is that I'm only talking about the digital version of SolForge Fusion. just a digital client. And in that client, pulling off an infinite combo is not exactly possible because you have a turn timer. However, combos that require very few pieces and very few clicks to do something can still get results even in a digital client. Mantis combo. You play a set 3 Cercee with Bones of Solace, and you use her ability Dark Rebirth, I believe it's called, to destroy one of your creatures and bring another creature back, or the same creature even. And if a Mantis uses that ability, the Mantis can bring back the Mantis. So you get an infinite amount of creatures entering play and leaving play. This might trigger your shambling something, or it might also just go infinite because your Mantis is a soothing Mantis, so you get some life. Or maybe you're really lucky and you have an assailing Mantis as a betrayer, you deal some damage. This combo is quick enough that you can get to like 150, 200 life maybe. I'm not really sure on the numbers, but a really high amount of life. And as you may know, life gain is a win con in SolForge Fusion, because at the end of cycle 4 we just pack up our things and leave. Do I think this deck is good? No. There are a lot of hoops you have to jump through. First of all, you have to play a Mantis that does nothing other than summoning Bones of Solace. So that's negative tempo already. Then you have to flip Bones of Solace, and if your opponent knows what you're up to, they are just going to ignore it, if they can. They are just going to make you work for it. So you have to play some Dire Hounds and stuff to kill your own creatures. And then you still have to find Mantis again to get those abilities. It is more consistent than any other combo deck, but I don't think it is very consistent. It's not like your opponent can really interact with it, it's just that the build-up takes long. That's the issue of this deck. And then if you are at 150 life, well, your opponent might still be able to win. If they play a Krogius early in cycle 3, that might just kill you. Because most of the time you will be left with, well, a kind of random deck that serves or follows no real strategy anymore. You've gotten your payoff, it's 150 life, enjoy. A Krogius might still kill you. A Soul Reaver might still put you to 0. There are ways how you can still die. I'm going to put this into the B tier and below Darkforge Drain. Mostly because when Darkforge Drain is inconsistent, it's because your opponent runs removal. When Mantis combo is inconsistent, that's because the deck needs to draw things in a specific order without dying first, because they lose a lot of tempo on the way there. Right, let's talk about something a bit weaker. How about this? Let's talk about all the tribal decks. Dinosaur Tribal. In my opinion, Dinosaur Tribal has the most tribal synergies out of all the tribal decks. Mostly because there were synergies before the Legendary Drop, and those were noteworthy synergies, like Rex and Patriarch. And then they've gotten more. I think just playing Dinosaur Tribal, that classic Utera Tempest list, is not going to get you anywhere. Unless, of course, we're playing a dinosaur format tournament in a everything goes competitive tournament. Just fusing dinosaurs is not going to get you anywhere. Dinosaurs has a few weak spots because it is very creature reliant and creatures have to see each other on the board. So you can't just play Patriarch and then expect your next dinosaur you play this turn to be buffed, because your Patriarch has to still be around by that time. If your opponent just interacts, you're playing vanilla creatures. Yeah, the synergies are there. It's just that they are not unfair enough. They all amount to getting big creatures and eventually swinging in for a lot of damage in cycle 2. That's a strategy. Because I don't know if you've noticed, but there's this recurring theme of dinosaurs being stupidly overstated in level 2. It's just something that has occurred to me. Now, I'm going to put this into the D tier, because while there are a lot of synergies, they are not unfair enough. And without the synergies, your general card quality isn't even that high. I'm sorry, dinos. Let's talk about another tribal deck. Scientists. Scientists suffer a lot of the same problems as dinosaurs. They didn't have as much synergy before the legendary drop. And I feel like after the legendary drop, they didn't get too much synergy either. They just get a lot of generically good cards. So what does this deck even do? Well, if you play for the scientist synergies, you probably want a harvester and an operator. So whenever a scientist dies, you get some minions, some replacement triggers, perhaps your Pokemonster goes wild. Sure. But what does that do though? Like, if you are capable of keeping 3 high priority targets on the board, harvester, operator, a Pokemonster, then I have to ask the question, is your opponent AFK? What I'm trying to say is, if your opponent plays this little interaction, you might as well win with any other deck. The synergies that scientists provide are not that specific. They are not as specific as dinosaur synergies. For example, you have the Technocrat and the Necrocrat, and they trigger off of creatures being summoned. So your harvester or operator can trigger these a lot if your guys die sometimes. And then there's the Stitcher that can replace a minion with something from your banish pile. These are all implicit synergies. They do not explicitly mention scientists. That makes the deck a bit more flexible, and something that makes this deck better than dinosaurs is the simple fact that you can play Necrium. You can get high card qualities. Now, do I think this archetype is competitive as of current? No. Most of the time, the scientist synergies are not even that relevant. It's just Alloyin, Necrium, good stuff. That's why I'm going to put it into the D tier. Because you really have to ask yourself, if you want to play this, why am I not just playing Necrium, Utera, good stuff instead? Because the amount of synergies that lead to some minion summoning and all that stuff that Alloyin provides you with, Utera can do that probably better without having to rely on synergy pieces. Yep. Let's get to the last tribal deck for now. So this is the one I know I'm going to get some hate for. Well, not really hate, because all of you guys are way too friendly, but yeah. People are going to disagree. Personally, I think Volana is the most overrated card. It's not that the card is bad, it's just that it's overrated. People slap 2 Volanas in a deck and they are like, oh my god, this Volana can use the other one, and then I can activate both and drain a lot of health from opposing creatures. And that's basically a deck. Yeah, fantastic. I'm simply not going to contest your Volana until I find a piece of removal. I'm just going to take the 4 damage every turn. It's going to be fine. It's just not that easy. You can't just slap a Volana into something, call it a competitive deck, and be done. It's not how it works. It doesn't work that way with Furious Shotback either, and that card is simply stronger than Velana in nearly every way. Now, Warriors is not just Velana though. Warriors is also Casey, a very powerful card. Warriors is also Core, solid card, and Warriors is also Baton, an absolutely overpowered card. But none of these strong cards need each other to function. For some reason, the strongest tribal deck is the one that uses the least tribal synergies. It just outperforms the others by having a massive amount of high quality cards. It's just insane card quality, but very little relevant synergy. Because, well, you can look at Velana and Varia, and those are obviously very powerful cards and some synergy pieces, if you will, but they do not require other warriors to be strong cards. They are self-sufficient because they themselves are warriors. I don't think the synergies of warriors are unfair enough, and the things warriors end up doing when they go off are also not unfair enough. Yes, they summon massive creatures that are sticky, and they will eventually swing in for a lot of damage. But that is all they really do. They don't win games by shambling your opponent. Like, they are simply too fair, I think. They are just better dinosaurs. They also fight enemies, they also have massive stat totals, and they are sticky. But that's all they do. They don't deal direct damage to your opponent. They do not create absurd boards in Cycle 1 like RSE decks. They're just way too fair. But they are very close to being competitive. But that's not because the warrior synergies are good. That's because the general card quality is absurd. I'm going to put this archetype definitely above D tier, above the other tribals. And I'm going to put it above the other C tier archetypes as well, because I can see this deck beating Blighted decks. Simply because Blighted decks are going to be overrun by bigger, more efficient creatures. Okay, now that I have made some enemies and most of you have turned off the video, we can talk about the spicy stuff. So, you've probably been wondering why there are two RSEs here. I haven't talked about this publicly yet because I wasn't quite sure if my hypothesis made sense. I have included it in this video though. The way I see it, there are two kinds of RSE decks. Because these decks have underlying play patterns that you want to follow. Imagine the following situation. 3 of your creatures attack in. Some random dude, an RSE, and your Shambler. Your RSE dies, and the random dude dies. And you know the Shambler is about to trigger. Obviously, you put your RSE under your Shambler to then summon it back. But where do you summon it? Do you summon it into a lane that is about to be contested because you want to use it defensively, because you think, well, I can just resummon RSE over and over, and by draining my opponent's resources, I'm eventually going to win a war of attrition? Or do you put it in an uncontested lane so you have an attacking creature next turn when you are still going to be off Forge? That's really the decision you make. And most decks follow one of these play patterns very consistently. I would call these play patterns aggressive and defensive RSE. Keep in mind, these terminologies, aggressive and defensive, they only apply to the behavior of the RSE, not the entire deck. In fact, it's, well, a bit paradoxical that defensive RSE decks that want to resummon RSE over and over again tend to be the more aggressive decks because they use a lot of face burn creatures to flip RSE, and that just leads to aggressive strategies. Whereas aggressive RSEs are your one big creature that you want to protect, you want to keep alive, you want to kill things that get in its way so it can swing in. These decks are a bit slower, a bit more defensive, and in my opinion also a bit weaker. I think a prime example of an aggressive RSE deck, where you just want to remove a lot of things and possibly not flip too much, is my Runescar Pit RSE list. Aside from the Invokist that I had no control over, I fused this deck with exactly one creature that can flip the RSE indirectly. And that was the Doom Revenant. It was a Doom creature that could also flip the RSE on deploy. Other than that, I used combat damage. I had this potent side strategy of Runescar Pits and Summon the Swarm 2 to get free creatures, and then I just maxed out on removal because I wanted these RSEs and those spell sprites to reliably swing in and boost them while clearing the way for them. The downside of the strategy is that you most of the time lack life gain. These kinds of decks, they struggle against decks that are very good at contesting RSE by just getting chump blockers out. And then they lose towards the late game because they simply cannot heal against potential burn damage from your opponents. I mean, this is just referring to high-stakes competitive tournaments where everybody plays top-tier archetypes. The advantage of playing such an RSE deck is that most of the time you can fit another strategy into it. You have a different angle from which you can win games. You do not have to draw the Nova Elementalist. That's the upside to playing this kind of deck. However, for now I'm putting this into A tier and I'm putting it below Perfect Cercee Grapple. While we are at it, let's talk about the other RSE deck, defensive RSE. So it took me some time to realize this, but right now I am convinced that defensive RSE is the superior deck in most situations. Defensive RSE just wants to play 4 or 5 creatures that can deal burn damage to flip RSE. And then you flip it over and over and just get an ungodly amount of value. You don't even want to swing in with it necessarily. You just want to drain your opponent's resources. These kinds of decks usually cannot fit a secondary strategy, unless of course you count an ungodly amount of burn damage as a secondary win con. Then the deck always has that angle as well. These decks are usually better off running a Necrim Forgebone, preferably. Why not a Perfect Cercee? Why not get yourself another late game win con and removal that you otherwise wouldn't have? You could also still run Sunder, especially if you summon the Swarm 2, that always is a good ability. But yeah, I think this archetype is a bit stronger most of the time than aggressive RSE, simply because it is more unfair when it goes off. Because let's face it, you are likely to see Nova Elementalist within the first 3 turns. The majority of the games you're going to see Nova Elementalist and you're going to go off. And when both of these decks go off, it is very clear to me that the defensive RSE is better. Yeah, that's all I have to say. River Control. This is basically a set 3 Necrim list with River of Souls, and preferably, if you have it, a Hound 2 is also helpful, because a Hound 2 is a good reanimation target, And when you have good reanimation targets on the board, the Hound attacks is mandatory. Now it deals a lot of damage always. But the Hound is not necessary. It's all about the River of Souls, really. So you fuse a set 3 Necrom list with the River of Souls with another deck that has one or more creatures that are just massively overpowered. So you get multiple uses out of those creatures. Targets that come to mind are Furious Shardback, perhaps a windy creature. Bombarder is really potent because it provides phased burn, it's a win con, it clears the board, fantastic creature all around. And Baton from the Warrior drop is, in my opinion, as good of a control tool as Furious Shardback for those reasons. There are many ways to approach this, but they all play the same for the most part. You are a late game deck because you need to play River of Souls multiple times to get some real use out of it. And sometimes you might even be delayed because River of Souls level 1 didn't show up in cycle 1. And then your whole strategy delays by another cycle. That's always pretty bad. But at the end of the day, this archetype shines through two things mainly. One is absurd card quality, because cards that are already so unfair they shouldn't exist in your deck multiple times. That's insane card quality. And the other thing is you can combine this with basically anything. For example, you can combine this with any tribal deck. Maybe you have a Dino deck with Astraxion. Getting multiple Astraxions might just kill your opponent instantly. Maybe you have a Warrior deck and you recur Baton over and over again, clear your opponent's board and leave a massive threat that only grows. That's also a valid strategy. But at the end of the day, it's more about River of Souls than those tribal things. I will put this... If I put this into B tier, I have to put it at the top of B tier, because this is more potent than any of these decks. Even though I imagine the Mantis combo deck would have a positive win rate against it, mostly because this deck is very slow. But this deck would just have a better win rate against everything else. I could put this either at the bottom of A or at the top of B. I think I'm going to put this at the bottom of A for now, but we'll see. Yeah, let's talk about a somewhat similar deck that can be combined with this. Soul Reaver. Soul Reaver Cercee is a deck that wants to play, well, a set 3 Cercee deck with Soul Swap at level 4. That becomes Soul Reaver, and then you have this button that just wins the game if you get there. I think the optimal way to play this is either with Utera or Alloyin. Alloyin because it's fantastic at stalling. Electronet is just a very good tool against threats in the meta. Then there's Sonic Burst, there's Energy Prison. There are just a lot of things Alloyin has going for it when it comes to supporting a powerful archetype that just really wants to survive until the late game. But then there's also Utera. Utera has Utera Charger, which is one of the best creatures for getting Bones of Solace to flip. You can play it into the Bones of Solace lane, kill something, have the Utera Charger die, and then you get a counter. I will definitely put this into A tier, and I will put it here. Definitely above River, but below aggressive RSE. Even though I think aggressive RSE would lose against a focused Soul Reaver deck more often than not, because Soul Reaver's just excellent at stalling. It's just built to stall. It's built to always have a 3/3 zombie minion in front of that RSE, so it never connects. I think the average Soul Reaver deck is just not going to be that good, because in order to really excel, a deck needs many tools. Not just the Cercee, that has to be very specific, but also some spells. You want something like a Direhound to accumulate counters. You want something to deal a bit of burn damage, so you can just snipe your opponent when you put him on low health. And preferably also River of Souls to recur all these things. It's very specific, but when you have all of it combined, well, when it's really focused, there are examples of those decks somewhere, then it's definitely an S tier deck. It's just that the general Soul Reaver deck won't be as good. The strategy in of itself is still capable enough. The average RSE deck is just very simple and requires very little tools to function, if that makes sense. Okay, let's talk about Glacier Burn. I called this Glacier Burn and not movement stuff, simply because there aren't enough relevant movement payoffs right now. There's only really Glacier. But Glacier is good, especially if you can get multiple Glaciers on the board. Not even through Betrayers, but just multiple levels of the same Glacier. That then deals an ungodly amount of burn damage. And the reason why it works so well is because the mobility also makes the Glacier a bit more elusive. It doesn't die to combat as easily. So it's a bit more likely to accumulate in several Glaciers on the board. Yeah, I'm going to put this into the D tier, and the reason is not that it's bad, it's just that there isn't enough payoff. The only real other movement payoff that we have in factions that aren't Tempest is like Palladium Simulacrum. That's not a good card. We would need something like, well, something else like Glacier in another faction. Another big payoff. That would really help this deck become real. However, one way to support your aggressive RSE would be to fuse it with a Betrayer Glacier, right? Glacier is an elemental. No matter where it is, it procs the RSE. And then you might have, because your Glacier might be an Alloyin, you might have other movement cards, you might have this funny little side strategy. I can see that function. Not as good as fusing it with Necroom, but good enough. Okay. Trinity Alloyin. What is Trinity Alloyin? It's basically all the good Alloyin cards from set 1. Apocalypse, Drake's rallying something. This deck has seen massive amounts of play. It's been around since the beginning. It was the only real way to make Alloyin somewhat viable for a long time. And I think it has gotten some results, maybe. But ever since tournaments were becoming really competitive and digital, it hasn't got a lot of results in, at least not in high stakes competitive tournaments. But at the same time, we recently played the Convergence Invitational, where people were literally forced to play Alloyin at some point. And even there, I haven't seen this archetype a whole lot. People tried out other things that they would deem more unfair. And they were right. This deck is pretty fair. The only times it becomes a bit absurd is when you play a Pokemonster at the end of cycle 1 and it sticks, and then you're on Forge, cycle 2, you draw your other Pokemonster, use your Forgeborn ability, get your replacement triggers. That's a lot of damage. Great. The thing is just this deck has a lot of tools that can easily get disrupted if one of them gets killed before the others can see play. For example, the rallying boost is not relevant if there's nobody else to boost. There are Pokemon that doesn't really do anything if you don't replace things. And replacing things is an inherent negative unless you replace a gizmo or you get some synergies out of it. So making this work is more difficult than it appears to be, especially when your opponent is on a lot of interaction. Back in the day, those decks were played with Utera for the most part, because Utera would just create a lot of minions. And I think we should really revisit this archetype and try something else. Try to find other ways to get quick replacements without losing much value. That's really what it's all about. And then maybe we can move this up a tier. But as it stands, I will put this into the D tier. I will put it above dinosaurs though. Not above scientists, because they get access to Necrium cards. But dinosaurs don't have a lot of interaction, and neither does the Glacior movement thing. They will not kill the Pokemonster reliably on time. Alright, more janky archetypes. Matching Omnis. I was kind of unsure whether I wanted to include this on the list or not, because this deck has, I don't think this has ever gotten any results anywhere. But people play this, and they do it in tournaments, so it has a relevant meta share, and we have to talk about it, I guess. And why wouldn't they play it? If you are so lucky that you have a Betrayer Omni, you want to fuse it with another Omni, because then you get your spell 2 times, you get your payoff 2 times. It's good, right? Well, no. Some matching Omnis are obviously better than others. Disintegrating Omni is good because it deals face damage and its spell is an okay card. Same goes for Sparking Omni. That one is better at controlling the board, but it can also deal face damage, and it even runs off of a very good spell. The other two Omnis, well, I would prefer not to talk about them. It's just not good. Right. So the downsides of this deck are very apparent. First of all, you have to run a set 1 Tempest deck. Unless, of course, we're talking about Magical Christmas Land, right? You have 2 Betrayer Omnis, they are somehow matching, and they somehow form a perfect Cercee Grapple deck. That's not gonna happen though. And if it is, I'm reevaluating my life choices, but as of current, that's not the case. The case is that people play set 1 Tempest, which can, in theory, create a very strong deck, right? Arrogant Breaker and Arrogant Lasher are really powerful cards. It's just that you need so many pieces that are all very rare to have this kind of a strong set 1 Tempest deck. And even when you do, right, you have your 6 spells, you have your optimal creatures, you have an optimal Sunder with Gathering Storm and Summoning Swarm into Gathering Storm into, well, doesn't really matter because you're supposed to win by then. Even then, you're kind of lacking a hard win con. Also, that deck doesn't exist. And then you have to run a Betrayer Omni, which is, it could be anything. It could be good, it could be bad. I'm just talking about the general strategy of just fusing some matching Omnis and winning off of those results. Yeah, no. I'm going to put this above the Glacier though, because the people who are running these decks are usually doing it with Disintegrating Omni or Sparking Omni. And those are good, I guess, when you find them. The rest of the decks are kind of filler, but those are good cards. Right. This Sack Chamber icon does not necessarily refer to the Sack Chamber. It refers to Slay Exalts, which are, well, the Sack Chamber, the Drone Hive, and the Runestone. I don't think I have forgotten anything. Terra doesn't really have one. Yeah. Exalts that get you an effect when a creature in their lane slays something. So you take one of these decks and fuse it with another deck that has a creature that is very good at slaying. For example, Furious Shardback. Now, while the combination of Sack Chamber and Furious Shardback is good in two ways, because we all know Furious Shardback is good at clearing up the board and coming back from a miserable board state, Sack Chamber helps you to not die afterwards. Clearing your opponent's board from a bad position is good, but you might just die because you've taken too much damage. If you have a Sack Chamber there, you might also drain your opponent for 15 or some amount like that, and then you're definitely back in the game. You just have to assemble this combo. An alternative route would be to play a Drone Hive with, for example, a Darkshaper Savant, right? You play a Darkshaper Savant, you play Drone Hive, under the Darkshaper Savant, trigger him, kill something, get a gizmo, trigger him, kill something, get a gizmo, and so on and so forth. I would put all of these decks into the same category, really. The good thing is they are flexible in how you can fuse them, because your Sack Chamber might just be an added bonus. You might also have a River of Souls or a Blighted Cercee as win cons. But then we are talking about a different kind of deck. People have been playing this with the only intention to put a Shardback into a Sack Chamber and get out of triggers. Or maybe a Grimgaunt Predator. I would say this archetype has potential, but it's better off supporting a stronger strategy. It's like it's an optimal example for what I would consider a good minor archetype. You're not going to win a massive tournament by just putting a random Shardback in a Sack Chamber. But if you can use this strategy in a stronger archetype, it's definitely going to be an added bonus. I'm going to put this above Darkflame simply because Darkflame hasn't gotten any results yet, so it's just hypothetical. But yeah, that's really all I can give it. Right, let's talk about Thundercrash Field. Well, this is not just about the Thundercrash Field. This is about aggressive Tempest Uterra decks that use minions and boost them and get payoffs. You do not have to run Thundercrash Field. Another approach would be to run a set 4 Tempest deck with Volteris, for example. Then you don't need the Thundercrash Field to get minions and payoffs for the things you do anyway. But the way this archetype has popped up recently was Thundercrash Field plus Uterra cards that boost your minions quickly. So Thundercrash Field is a difficult card to evaluate. Its level 1 version is, well, good enough. It's basically like a Warbringer ritual, with a slight upside. Its level 2 version is the exact same, and that is kind of a problem. Because you're just losing out so much tempo compared to other level 2 cards. And then you have the level 3 version, which is completely absurd. Getting 3 Spell Swarms in the correct lanes potentially following up with something like a Flame Jet. It's an absurd amount of burn damage, and it's a really good win con. The problem is you cannot cheat yourself to that point. You cannot upgrade your Thunder Crash field with Army Commander or something like that. You need to have played all of them to get the payoff. That's really the issue of the deck. Now this deck does other things, and very successfully. For example, you could have a Sunder with Summoning the Swarm 2 and a Transcendent Biologist. That's basically a full board with minions that you boost, and they grow even more powerful as time progresses. You could also have a Mantis in that fuse, like Mantis to summon some spell sprites in cycle 1 and then play Biologist and boost everything. That is aggression that's very comparable to flipping RSE in turn 1. Now, do I think this archetype is therefore comparable to RSE? No, because the card quality is generally speaking not as high, and the strategy kind of contradicts the cards that you play. You have these really aggressive cards that want to close out the game quickly, but at the same time you do not get the biggest payoffs until you play the level 3 versions of cards you've played before, like Thunder Crash Field. That's kind of suboptimal, I would say, because as an aggressive deck, you want to finish the game in cycle 2, at the end of cycle 2 preferably, because your opponent unlocking level 3 Forge Spawn abilities can be huge comeback potential for them. We will probably see more of this archetype as time progresses. This has popped up only quite recently in the Conversions Invitational, and it did get some results. So I have to put this either at the top of C tier, because there is an argument for this being an excellent support strategy for, well, the other good set 2 Tempest deck. Or alternatively, I put this at the bottom of B tier, because it did get some results the moment it popped up. But is this better than Warriors? Because generally speaking, is this better than Warriors? No, I don't know. Warriors might overrun this deck with just bigger creatures in the early game. But at the same time, Warriors might lack removal. They cannot remove Volteris when they need to. It's a difficult matchup. It depends on the lists, really. I'm going to put this at the top of C tier above Warriors. Yep, that's what I'm going to do. Okay. Killion Mantis Seal. The deck I saved for last. So this deck is very difficult to evaluate, and you have lots of reasons to disagree with my judgment of this deck. Basically, we do not have an adequate sample size of Killion Mantis Seal fuses. The reasons for that are, well, Killion is stupidly rare. I don't know whether or not it's true, but I've heard somebody say you have to open like 50 Alloyin, Beakers and Bones decks to be expected to see one Killion, and then that Killion is probably not that optimal. So it's just not as farmable as something like a perfect Cercee. And then you have to fuse it with a specific Utera deck. A lot of people do not have a Mantis+Forge Seal Krogias deck. There aren't a lot of those around. They are less than you would expect, considering it's a set 1 deck that has been around since forever. But that's just the way it is. So both the really good Killion is very rare, and for some reason the set 1 Mantis+Forge Crogius deck is also very rare. But let's just imagine for a second that you have both of these decks and you can fuse them. I don't think Killion Mantis Seal has any bad matchup. If your Killion is, well, good, it has convergence on level 2. So in cycle 1 as well as in cycle 2, you are basically guaranteed to have bigger creatures than your opponents. Because using a Mantis to upgrade a card, get a 10/10 with 2 armor in cycle 1 is very realistic. My Killion Mantis Seal deck does that all the time. And then you also get the Mantis as an additional body. Who knows what abilities that Mantis might have. And you do that 3 times. Now obviously you can only have 1 Killion on the board, so the best strategy is to use him defensively to drain your opponent's resources, basically like a defensive RSE in the early game, except for that your creature actually kills an RSE and survives, and you upgrade a card for your troubles. And once that phase is over, we get to cycle 3. There is no window in between where the deck falls off, right? The early game is dominated by massive Killions, lots of upgrades. You will never have to play a level 1 card in cycle 2 if you don't want to. And then we immediately get to cycle 3, where Crogius and other broken level 3 cards become live. And that's also where Killion Mantis Seal outshines Army Commander 4 Cercee. Because while Cercee Army Commander 4 with Crogius is somewhat consistent, Killion outperforms that consistency on every level, every time. Because, well, the way Cercee creates a Crogius is a way that Killion can kind of do as well. You can also have Mantis activations and Forgebone abilities to get yourself to get your Crogius from level 1 to level 3 instantly. That's also possible. You might need 1 more action phase than Cercee, depending on your specific cards, but that's really all there is to it. You can accomplish the same kind of burst Crogius. But you have another additional angle to get to level 3 Crogius. You can also upgrade him with your convergence ability passively, with your Alloyin cards, like you probably want to tech upgrade and energy prison or something like that. So you have this additional angle to get to Crogius. And that makes it more consistent in that regard. And then there's the Alloyin cards from the Scientist drop that do not necessarily need Scientist synergies, but are just insanely strong cards on their own. I'm talking Siphon Chrome, which just shuts down life gain decks, very powerful. And even when you're not against a life gain deck, a 6/9 with armor 1 in cycle 1 is stupidly overpowered. That thing kills an unbuffed RSE without dying itself. That's very powerful. Then there is the Sequencer, a creature that can just shut down Exalt-based strategies. And the stupidest thing about it is it does so whenever it wants to. Even when you're against an RSE deck or Bones of Solace, maybe River Control, something like that. You do not have to play your Sequencer as you see it, because the effect of the Sequencer isn't level gated. It becomes an absurdly powerful underdrop that you can just play when the timing is right. So you also have counterplay to those strategies. And then there are the Utera cards, the set 1 Utera cards. There's nothing stopping you from also having an ungodly amount of life gain, except maybe your own Siphon Chrome if you played him. But I've noticed that you still want to play Siphon Chrome because the life gain synergies you can realistically get in cycle 1 are not as powerful as a 6-1, 6-9 with armor 1. That's basically like a kindred creature that got buffed 2 times. It's stupid. Well, so what does that leave us with? We have a deck that can turbo out level 3 creatures more consistently and quicker than a deck that does only that and survive until that point. We have a stronger early game than RSE. We have a stronger mid game than RSE. It is, in theory, the perfect deck. Now, it cannot do some things that other decks can do. For example, it doesn't have the broken Necreum cards. Like, there's no shambling going on, no Dark Art Sorcerer, no indirect damage. But the way I see it, the deck doesn't need those things to function because Killion is just that overstated. Sooner or later, my 17/17 with armor 1 that I get at the end of cycle 2, because I replaced the Gizmo or something, sooner or later that thing is going to hit in and it will hurt. Because you just overwhelm your opponent with value. This is the amount of value that you need to overwhelm your opponent to an extent that deals enough damage that is comparable to just shambling them every combat. And it's kind of sad that this amount of power is needed for that kind of strategy. But that's just the way I see it. Yeah. Now the fortunate thing, or unfortunate, depending on how you see Killion, how you like him, is that these decks do not exist yet. I have a very good Mantis+Forge Krogias deck that is waiting to be fused with a good Killion list. I have a decent Killion list with a Siphon Chrome, no Sequencer though, no Spell Shield creatures though, 5 spells. It's alright. It's pretty good. But imagine this for a second. Okay, I have a really, really powerful defensive RSE list. Lots of ways to flip RSE, a Furious Shardback, a very good Cercee. It's an insane deck. My best deck. I played this against Jed, who had a Mantis+Forge Seal Killion Fuse. And no offense to Jed, but his Mantis+Forge Seal Killion Fuse was below average. It didn't have a Krogias. The Killion lists had like 7 creatures or something. Most of them weren't very good. Same goes for the Mantis list. But he did have a Sequencer. So what happened was, Sequencer killed my RSE before I could flip it once. That was kind of unfortunate. But it still shouldn't have been a lost game, because my card quality was still infinitely higher than his, right? I had 2 Shamblers, some Empiric creatures, life gain synergies, a Blightwitch, a Furious Shardback. It shouldn't have been that one-sided. So what Jed ended up doing is summon Killion a bunch of times, and at a certain point I was just unable to deal with the Killions anymore because they grew so big. I can only have 1 Dreadbolt per cycle. You have to give me some rest. And if it wasn't for him making a crucial misplay within the last turn, I could not have squeezed out the win. And I didn't squeeze out the win by winning on board. No, the board state was lost like 3 turns beforehand. I could never come back from that. I just amassed a critical amount of burn damage. That's all I did. Yep. That was an undoubtedly below average Killion Mantis Seal deck that wasn't even complete. It didn't even have a late game win con like Krogias. and it got very close to absolutely wiping the floor with the best deck I ever had. Yep. I'm going to leave you on that note. This has been quite the talk, and I hope it can spark some discussions. Thank you for listening this far. If you did, I know I wouldn't have. I would already be in the comments and typing something about how my Velana deck is the best deck ever because Velana is best girl ever. But yeah, we'll get to that point. See you around.
Hey everyone, I am here. I had to kick Peter out. He stole my show. So thanks for watching this far through Peter's discussion there on the current meta of SolForge Fusion and his thoughts on a lot of different archetypes. He covered any archetype that is probably potentially relevant at all. I don't think he missed anything. I couldn't think of anything. So I worked with Peter after he made the video. Of course, I'm putting this out on my channel. I've made a graphic I'm going to show, and also we're going to show some decks examples of these different archetypes. So the image here, I mimicked what Scuba Toad and Nathus had put out, a year ago or whatnot, whatever it was now. So I did like a little Venn diagram type of chart here with all of the S, A, and B tier decks that Traveler listed, with some additional information of some cards that would be potentially in those archetypes. So I'm not going to talk too much about the chart right now. We'll do that as we go through the decks. And this is not every archetype he talked about. I think he talked about like almost 20 different archetypes, and he split RSE into 2. So yeah, a lot to discuss, a lot to go through. You've obviously seen his portion of the video now, and I'm not going to rehash too much or really give my thoughts this time on what I agree or disagree with. I don't fully agree with all of his analysis, but everyone has different opinions on things. So we're going to have this pulled up on the screen like this when we're out showing the decks that I'm going to be talking about. That way you can kind of see it. I'll reference it, and that'll help hopefully people who are, whether you're new to the game or whatever it may be, whatever the case may be, this type of information is valuable to all players. So I hope everyone who plays the game is watching and has enjoyed the video so far, and they enjoy this last section, so to speak. So the first deck we have up here is not the first deck I wanted to show. This is the first deck I wanted to show. So this deck here, we start with a Soul Reaver deck. You can't see on the fused view the soulbind for the Forgeborn Serum. You can see Bones of Solace. We know Soul Siphon turns into Soul Reaver. We have a Soothing Mantis, and this is the Dark Rebirth. I think I said Soul Reaver, but Dark Rebirth is what I meant. Dark Rebirth infinite combo that you can do in physical. You can do this a little bit in the client digitally, and Peter kind of talked about that. It's not, with the timer, you don't get to go infinite, but you can gain substantial health and potentially use that to win because, life is a win condition, as Peter said. So this was the deck. This is Ank's deck that won Worlds last year. He had a lot of close calls, but he pulled it out and went undefeated with it. Again, congrats to him on that. But this was an example of a deck. I have a version I have that we're going to discuss later. Obviously did not perform as well as Ank's did, but the key thing is having the Bones of Solace, the Blighted Cercee with Soul Siphon, preferably cycle 3, not cycle 4, and having a card that you can bring back, constantly giving you life. Soothing Mantis, of course, does it. There's some other things you could do. You could do an Assailing Mantis with Tempest for damage, infinite damage. So just showing that one. The next archetype we're going to show is the life gain and drain, the Grapple life gain synergies that Peter talked about. This is one of my decks. It's one of my better decks. So you can see Swamp Moss Lurker. We got Zrath's Will. I don't have a Primal Surge in this deck, but I do have other things. I've got Dissient Siphon for some free plays with life gain as well. But you can see we have the Swamp Moss is free when you gain the health. I got double Soothing Creatures. I have a Glowhive Siren, plenty of life gain. Oros has Growth Aura, so that allows me to also gain health. And then the Necreum half, Shambling Summoner can gain me health and also drain their health. Vampiric, great for this purpose as well. So this deck performs really well, and it just fits into the life gain and drain archetype to a T, in my opinion. So this is a very common deck. It's easier to find and put something together for this than it is a lot of the other archetypes because, well, set 1 Utera is probably the best faction and set for life gain oriented things, along with set 1 Necreum. They just work so well together in that regard. So even if this is not the top archetype, this can win you a lot of matches, and you can compete with it and even pull out some wins sometimes when you wouldn't expect to. Next, we have the top archetype, Killion Mantis Seal with Krogaius, preferably. This is Traveler's deck. He might have one of the better Killions currently that is known. I have a bunch of Killions, and none of them have... I think the highest I have might be 3 spells. I don't think I have any with 4 spells even. But he's got a drone for the upgrading. He's got a Siphon Chrome, which is great. His spells aren't horrible. So he's got a pretty decent Killion, I'd say, and it's got Convergence on cycle 2, which really works well with the Mantis and the Forge Seal. Of course, he's got Krogaius, which is one of the key parts of, in my opinion, the whole engine for Killion. Granted, you don't have to have Krogaius, but it certainly makes life easier, and I think it's important for that. So this is an example of a Killion Forge Seal Mantis deck. Not going to go into how to play all these decks so much. I just want to kind of cover what they might look like. To learn to play them, you need to build them and then go ahead and get in queue and start playing them. When I first played some Killion decks I made, it definitely took a little bit of nuance of learning when it's best to use your Mantis or Forge Seal, depending on the game state and different things, how often you want to be able to pull out the Killion Converge, whether it's on cycle 2, 3, or 4, etc. So a lot of little nuances to learn with it, but it's definitely strong, and I agree this might be the new top archetype in the game. All right, next up we have a Soul Reaver deck here, and this is Carl's Soul Reaver deck. Peter feels this is probably the best Soul Reaver deck currently out there that we know of. So you can see the Bones of Souls, the Blighted Cercee again. You have Soul Swap on cycle 4. It turns to Soul Reaver, and only on cycle 4 does it let you switch the health of a creature and a player. That's the key with Soul Reaver. You don't want it to be on cycle 3 because that's just creature to creature. It's not player to creature or vice versa in that regard. So you got to have it on cycle 4, and then you want something. Shambling Direhound is great. River of Souls is really nice because you can bring it back on call. So you kind of set that up, and if you can swap their health down to 1, perhaps you can bring anything back with the Shambling Direhound, sack something, and boom, game over. So Peter thinks this is the best version. I don't disagree. It's an amazing deck, but definitely awesome. I don't know if the Utera half is necessarily the perfect half or not, but it's definitely obviously he uses it and it works well for him. I don't know if he has any other versions or not, but there might be other cards he might want or could have potentially that he might want more of. I don't know, but obviously this version of the deck really good. Next up, we have, this is going to be the River of Souls Reanimation, the River of Souls control that Peter talks about. And he talked about, he's got it paired here with the Furious Shardback, double windy creatures, really strong in that regard. He's got 11 spells, which is crazy. So he mentioned you can pair this with other things. You could go with Astraxian, Bombarder, Baton. You could if you have in your deck Darkshaper Savant, Hantu would be really good as well. He's got a Direhound in here. So this deck is twofold. It's the RoS Reanimation that we're showing, but also you can see he's got Soul Swap on cycle 4 with his Blighted Cercee. So this kind of combines the Soul Reaver and the RoS Reanimation. Carl's deck also had RoS, but he didn't have so much control with it as much as Peter's angling for here. But you can see that some of these archetypes you can combine, and with the right decks, it can be even stronger or give you additional win conditions to win matches. So this one's kind of a 2-for-1, and this deck's really good. Peter has a really good Furious Shardback deck for that. My deck is not. I have a similar Furious Shardback deck, but I only have 3 spells and one's an Exalt, so it's not quite as good. It could potentially be used in something like this. I don't know if I have as good a Soul Swap deck as he does. I definitely don't have a 6-spell one. He's got a Cercee's Call, Dreadbolt, River of Souls, Varric's Embrace, so really good spells. Restless Dead and Hungering Strike aren't awful. They're not the same class as the other 4, but still, it's not horrible spells. So really strong deck here, and again, this one is a combination. It's RoS Reanimation / Control, but also Soul Reaver as well. So that brings me to my Dark Rebirth deck, which also has Soul Reaver on cycle 4. I just don't have anything to, like Carl's deck does. He's got a Shambling Direhound he can bring back. I don't have River of Souls in it. So this deck is combining Dark Rebirth and Soul Reaver. Now, this deck, if it's going to win by Dark Rebirth, not usually Soul Reaver, but it does have Soul Reaver, so if we had a mirror match, I could potentially swap a person's health out and thus get the win on an infinite in that instance. But otherwise, this deck isn't great, but it's just, it's like Peter said, these decks are not good, but they can win matches. So, I'll always be in search of better combinations and versions of this for my account, but this is what I have. I do have another version that might be slightly better, but I don't know yet. So, but this is the one that my son played at Worlds and finished higher than I did with my Life Gain and Drain deck that I showed earlier. So, next up we have a Perfect Cercee, also a AC4 which is Army Commander, Cycle 4. This is a Mantis+Forge Seal Krogaius. This is the precursor to the Killion deck. This won the first 2 worlds, won the first worlds, if I'm not mistaken. I don't know. I don't think Hellkite had Krogaius in his deck. He might not have had Krogaius, but he was definitely in the Life Drain and Gain, Perfect Cercee, Mantis. I don't know if he had Forge Seal or not off the top of my head, but so nonetheless, this is an example of a Mantis+Forge Seal Krogaius deck. Is this the same half that Peter had for the other that he paired with his Killion deck? Maybe, I wonder. I had to close that tab out. But, so you can just see all the stuff. Peter loves his control with that stuff, but you know, you're getting all these extra Forgeborn uses. So it's definitely Mantis, Forge Seal, and Kragaius is one heck of a combination. It gives you options, definitely, with making decks. Next up, we have Rumblespark. So again, Peter had 2 versions of this. He's got an aggressive and he's got a defensive, as he calls it. This is his defensive version. This was he feels his superior version. And I think both of his RCs are freaking amazing. I'm jealous because I want an RC with a Furious Shardback, but he pulled that one at some point, I don't know when, and it's got 4 spells, pretty good spells. He's got it paired with a double Vampiric, double Shambling, Blight Witch with Betrayer, Relentless Wanderer's half, which is just a crazy Necrium half. Of course, he's got a Dreadbolt in there, Zrath's Will, Spirit Leash. This deck is really amazing. Both halves are both amazing in their own right. So this is his defensive RSE. And it's like he said, it's not so much the cards, all the other cards that are in the deck. It's about how you use the RSE. In this case, he uses the RC to extract the opponent's resources because everyone wants to get rid of RC when it flips over. That's their focus, when maybe they shouldn't necessarily be focusing there. But at the same time, if you don't and you ignore it, it could punch through for some damage. So this is different than his aggressive RSE, as he calls it, where he wants to clear lanes and get his RC damage through. He's going to pump it up, and he's going to clear out the lanes so it can punch through for 20 at a time and get chunk damage done. And there are times where he's played this and he doesn't get the RC going at all, and he's got everything else in this deck to carry him, which was something I've always talked about. What makes a really good RC deck is when you don't need the RC and you still can win with the deck. His deck is one of those even with the RC not in there, the deck is really, really strong and really hard to play against and even beat. So, but this is his lesser RC, which is crazy because he might have the 2 best RC decks in the game. Okay, what haven't we covered yet? I think we've covered almost everything. The only thing we've got left is Darkforge Drain spot on the chart, where it's meant to be intersecting all 3 between Tempest, Utera, and Necrium, because Darkforge Drain can be paired with Necrium, or it can be paired with Tempest. And I'm going to give some examples here. I think I've got 3 examples just to show, because I have a bunch of these types. So preferably Darkforge Drain in Cycle 2, Mantis, Forge Seal if you've got it, and then you want a lot of spells. And as Peter points out and has on the chart there, creature-based spells. This deck has that in the Necrium half for sure. You want things to put creatures out and play. I don't have a Cercee's Call in this deck, but that'd be a great spell to have here. But you want to fill up your lanes until you can get to the point where you've got a bunch of spells in your banish pile, and you get your preferably a breakthrough creature. I've got a Basher in this deck, and you pound your opponent through with the breakthrough, and you just hope they don't have the removal for it. Or, I've got Summoning Council, so I can get some Oak Fathers in play. You pump up multiple creatures with using a Mantis or Forge Seal, and then using the Forge Mobility as well. You can hit multiple creatures and cause a lot of pressure on your opponent. So that's the gist of the deck. This is a Necrium Utera version, and I got 2 Tempest versions just to show kind of a little different. This is a different half for the Darkforge Drain. It's still in Cycle 2, but I'm pairing it with a Tempest here, with a 6-spell Tempest here. We got Warbringer Ritual, Flame Jet, So some extra free plays and whatnot, which is really nice. Stormcaller could potentially get me a free play. I don't have a breakthrough creature in this deck, so we're gonna have to punch through by overwhelming them. One of the things we can do is use Windspark Elemental off Forge, pop it in open lane, Darkforge Drain it, and you've got someone coming through like that. There's also Lightning Charge in this deck, which can make creatures aggressive if you level it up or they're on the right cycle there. So the deck, you can use a Tempest because Tempest is very spell heavy, generally speaking. So you have that, and then also another version here is with set 4 here. You can use an Eric's the Stormweaver to get some extra plays. You can also use Blight Witch with Necrium as well, which I didn't have in mind, to get some additional free spell plays out there. Chaining is very popular with this format. We've seen, obviously, Sile's triple chaining deck is pretty crazy. You had, was it Scuba Toad that had the Chaining Sentinel? We've seen some versions of these types of decks that are just really, really strong. So this deck here has Darkforge Loyalty, Tempest Loyalty to get some free plays, potentially. It has Minion Generation, Stormstrike, Elemental Discovery. So fits the bill for what Peter's talking about. Also has Breakthrough with the Delver here, which is really helpful. So Splicer can put a Oakfather in play as well. So yeah, these are all the archetypes. The top archetypes in between S, A, and B. And the chart I'll post up with the video link when I post this up, of course. So you'll have access to that if you want to save it. It's kind of an update from the one Scuba Toad and Nathus made. This is not so much oriented in a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 order or anything of that nature. It's kind of showing how the different factions can overlap and how you can build things, and also showing these examples of these decks hopefully can help you with that. Making some decks, finding some combinations you might not have realized you had. Yeah, so that's what I have for this. I don't want to include anything else for this video. It's already really long. I did want to include, obviously, the decks, and Peter's portion of the video is the key portion, but I felt giving examples of some of the decks would help people be able to look through their collection, potentially find pairs, and we list a lot of cards you can look for on here to help you look at it for a base type of deck and eventually build from there when you potentially find better versions. So I did go through all this with Peter beforehand to make sure he kind of approved and didn't think anything was crazy wrong. I might have used some different terminology than he did, but for the most part, everything's the same. It all means the same. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. Thanks to Peter for putting this out, Traveler. I do appreciate that, and for him giving me the opportunity to put this on my channel. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it as well, and looking forward to seeing what comes up. We have the Mage Legendary Drop coming up, so that's going to potentially change things, or does it just enhance everything? We're going to find out. Do some of the archetypes that are not on this list, do they get bumped up? The Omnis, for example, are they going to make a rise? Maybe, maybe not. Does RSE get crazier and surpass Killion potentially? We're going to find out. And does Darkforge Drain get bumped up because we can have 14 spell decks now? Who knows? We just don't know. Everything hasn't been spoiled yet. We do have more spoilers coming, so that'll be in a video before next week's release. So yeah, enough talking, and go play the game, go make some new decks, have some fun. I appreciate you guys being here and watching. So yeah, thank you, and thank you again, Peter. Really appreciate it. Everyone, make sure you thank Peter as well if you enjoyed the video. Don't forget to like and comment on the video if you enjoyed it. I appreciate it. Take care.